Hello guys, this is your friend Dark Fox 3.0 and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is, what if Naruto was saved by a mysterious goddess, and his forbidden bond with Shizune ignited a harem of passion and pain? Part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. It was the 8th anniversary of the defeat of the fearsome nine-tailed fox demon and the people of Konoha were celebrating all throughout the village. She smiled as she watched the celebrations from her perch atop the Hokage monument, the feelings of unity and happiness washing over her from the people below. But something pricked at her mind as she immersed herself in the feelings of the village. Amidst the happiness there were small concentrations of sadness, particularly near the cemetery, as well as a large congregation of hatred and anger. While both were somewhat to be expected, considering the nature and history of the day the villagers were commemorating, she focused on the mass of fury gathered near the opposite edge of the village and felt the sadistic glee lying just beneath. This feral happiness grew as the group emitting these feelings began moving quite quickly through one of the gates towards the forest surrounding the village. She continued to watch for a moment before deciding to follow as she felt several surges of chakra coming from the group. She leapt off the mountain and it took her just over a minute to make it to the top of the wall on the other side of the village just out of sight of the two shinobi guarding the village gate. She paused as she felt the mass of anger stop moving about 3 kilometers from the village. The cruel joy grew and her eyes widened as within the nauseating mixture of hatred and euphoria was the smallest pinprick of fear. Faster than she had ever moved before she dove into the forest, only sparing the barest thought to making sure she remained unnoticed. She came to a stop on a branch high up in a tree overlooking the clearing where the mob of civilians and shinobi alike were gathered. She watched as they shouted and jeered as several of them ganged up on the source of fear, brandishing weapons and jutsu alike. Eventually they grew bored and moved away to give another group a turn, and as they rejoined the rest of the mob she saw the target of their malice. It took everything she had to rein in her anger and not wipe everything in that clearing along with the rest of that puny village off the face of the planet when she looked upon the broken, bleeding form of the boy. His hands and feet had been pinned to the tree behind him with kunai while not a single part of him was not covered in cuts, scrapes, bruises, and burns. What remained of his clothes were in tatters, and from what she could see, he was extremely malnourished. The next group had taken their place and started attacking him when she decided that enough was enough. She was just about to jump down and erase these disgusting mortals from this plane when the boy raised his head and looked directly at her as if sensing her intentions. With what little energy he had, he gave her a minute shake of his head. She could feel his will fighting valiantly against his fear and desire for the end of his pain. She could feel the sadness and loneliness deep in his heart along with the smallest speck anger and bitterness festering at the bottom of his heart. Her eyes widened in understanding as she focused more on the boy and felt a separate mass of chakra within him. This boy was the container of the nine-tailed demon fox. That was why the villagers hated him so. They mistook the host for his tenant and were using him as a justifiable outlet for their darker urges and feelings. Knowing this, she was surprised by how small and deeply buried the boy's own darker feelings were. She contemplated this and came to a decision just as a villager gave a shout and cleaved a butcher knife through his right shoulder, forcing the boy to close his eyes and throw his head back in pain. His mouth was open as if to shout his agony to the heavens, but the most that would come out was rattling gasp. "Ha! Can't make much noise without those vocal cords of yours, can you, demon?" The man jeered as the others of the group laughed along. Deciding she had seen enough, She focused her chakra into a genjutsu and used the illusion to will everyone in the mob to leave and return to their homes. Though it was not nearly enough in her opinion, she would follow through with the boy's wish to leave them unharmed, at least until she knew his reasoning. She waited until the last villager had left and dropped down to the ground just as the boy managed to wriggle the kunai impaled through his left hand out of the tree. He had put the handle of the kunai in his mouth and started to pull when the last of the flesh connecting his arm to his torso gave with a sickening tearing sound. His mouth opened once more with a silent howl as his body started to drop without the support of his other arm in the tree. Acting on instinct, she was in front of him in less than a second and gently catching his falling form. She pulled the kunai out of his feet and looked down at him with teary eyes. It amazed her that even on the cusp of unconsciousness, she could see glimpses of a mind behind those fading eyes that analyzed her with a speed that she didn't even think the boy was aware of as it blurred the line between rational observation and honed instinct. It didn't take long for him to succumb to the blood loss from his severed limb though, and she started to pour her chakra into him in order to keep him alive while his slumbering tenant and what she could feel was inherited genetics did what they could to heal him. She wished she could have done more, but the laws governing her were quite strict. That being said, though, there was no way she could just leave him there. She did a quick scan of his memories and was disgusted, though no longer quite as surprised, to see how horrible his life was. Deciding at that moment that the young man in her arms was more worthy than any other, she scanned his memories more closely and was both relieved and angered that he considered the leader of this village a sort of surrogate grandfather when the man allowed such cruelties to befall not just one of his own villagers, but a boy he considered himself close to. Standing, she gently cradled the boy, Naruto, to her chest and almost cooed at the gentle expression on his blood and tear-stained face as he cuddled closer to her. Her resolve set, she didn't even bother moving, not wanting to jostle her charge, and focused on her destination as she focused on the location of this so-called Hokage. Perhaps it was time for the god of shinobi to receive a visit from a real god. Ooh. Hiruzen Sarutobi frowned as he signed yet another piece of paperwork. Though the sounds of his villagers enjoying the festivities that night should have filled him with content as they drifted through his window, he couldn't help but worry for one boy in particular. Despite his best efforts to convince the people of Konoha that Uzumaki Naruto was a hero who kept a calamity made flesh at bay with his every breath, they simply were too lost in their pain and hate and ignorance to believe the boy was anything but the monster he housed. Recognizing his failure to uphold the last dying wish of Naruto's father, he declared any knowledge concerning the boy's status as a Jinchuriki classified at the highest level, only to be discussed with others by the Hokage, or Naruto himself once he knew. Unfortunately, that plan too backfired as the secret still got out, causing the rest of the adult population to regard it as the village's biggest open secret, and for their hate to trickle down and infect the minds of their children. Hiruzen sighed as he once again contemplated telling Naruto the truth about what he held within himself. He knew the boy was far more intelligent than he let on, and it was only a matter of time before he pieced the truth together himself. This line of thinking led to him wondering about how Minato and Kushina would react if they knew how poorly their son was treated. It always broke his heart whenever Naruto asked him about his heritage and he had to lie through his teeth. Both Minato and Kushina were legends in their own right, and if any of their numerous enemies knew they had a son, he wouldn't last a week. Heaving another sigh, Hiruzen reached for another piece of paperwork when his office was lit up by a pillar of brilliant white fire. He tensed as the fire died down and a figure appeared. By the time the fire was gone, leaving a tall beautiful woman with flowing black hair standing in front of his desk, His 4 Anbu bodyguards had sprung from their place hidden in the shadows and had their swords drawn against various vital points on her body. "Who are you, and how did you get in here?" the Anbu wearing a dog mask asked. Hiruzen watched as the woman looked Kakashi up and down before turning her attention back to him and leveling a glare at him so powerful it made him want to crawl forward on his hands and knees and beg for forgiveness. "Hiruzen Sarutobi, Thrid Hokage of Konohagakure, I find you lacking," she said calmly. Forcing his face to remain calm in spite of the crushing fear coursing through him, Hiruzen looked her up and down. At first glance, she did not appear to be much of a threat. Her body had an almost soft look to it, which along with her elegant white and orange robes made her look like a member of royalty. Even so, he remained wary. One didn't get to be as old as him by taking things at face value. "It would be wise to answer my friend's question, lest you find yourself lacking a head, madam," Hiruzen replied, struggling to maintain his calm collected facade. The woman's eyes burned with a cold fire. "I see no reason to lower myself to answering the questions of a broken man who uses his gifted eye to look only on the losses of the past as he hides behind the mask of a dog." Hiruzen's eyes widened while Kakashi stiffened before he and the other Anbu moved to incapacitate her before bringing her to interrogation. They didn't even have a chance to move as all the Anbu around her slumped to the floor unconscious when a massive amount killing intent fell upon the room. Hiruzen gasped as a pressure even greater than the one he felt 8 years ago pushed down on him. "Nor do I take commands from an old man whose fall from grace has allowed the people of his village to ruin the life of the purest soul among them." Hiruzen held himself up on his desk and his eyes widened as the bundle in the woman's arms shifted and he caught sight of a flash of blonde hair. "I don't care who you are," he gasped as he fought with everything he had to rise to his feet. "If you so much as think about hurting Naruto, I will make sure you never leave this room." Surprisingly, the pressure on him lessened as the woman gave him the barest hint of a smile. "Now isn't that funny?" she mused as she carried Naruto over to the couch in his office and sat down. "What is?" Her face softened even more as she looked down at the slowly breathing boy in her arms. "My name is Amaterasu." Hiruzen's eyes widened in recognition briefly before narrowing in suspicion. "I find it funny that you would challenge and threaten me, a goddess who could wipe you from this plane of existence with nary a thought, while under the presumption I meant to do young Naruto harm, but you won't lift a finger against the people of your village, the strongest of whom could hardly pose a threat to you, even now in such a state of atrophy when they do this." Amaterasu shifted her arm to reveal the broken and bloody form of Naruto. In a flash, Hiruzen was in front of the boy, looking him over. When his eyes fell on the bloody stump where Naruto's right arm was supposed to be, he could no longer restrain himself. Tears fell from his eyes and a sob tore its way through his throat. "Naruto, I'm so sorry." Kneeling on the floor, Hiruzen Sarutobi wept for the injustice of the world. He wept for the pain the boy he saw as another grandson must have been in. He wept for his own weakness and stupidity for allowing this to happen behind his back. After an indefinite amount of time, his tears slowed and he felt a soft, warm hand cradle his cheek. He lifted his face to look into the warm silver eyes of the woman above him. "Please," he begged, "if you are who you say you are, please heal him." Amaterasu looked down at him with pity. "I'm afraid I can't do that. The laws that govern me are much stricter than yours. At the moment it is only my chakra that is keeping him alive. If I stop providing it to him, not even his regenerative abilities or those of his tenant will be able to save him before he succumbs to his wounds." "Then why have you come here?" Hiruzen asked. Was it just so I could see the suffering my failures have caused? You think far too highly of yourself, Hiruzen Sarutobi, Amaterasu replied snidely. I descended to this plane because I foresaw a great conflict. One so terrible it threatened all I have created. The laws I created may prevent me and any other being not of this plane from interfering directly with the affairs of its inhabitants, but it does not prevent me from delivering blessings upon the select few I deem worthy. And you found Naruto to be worthy? That remains to be seen, Amaterasu replied. But after having observed his memories, I have deemed him fit to take my test, and in order to do that he must remain on this plane. Hiruzen watched stupefied as Amaterasu held out one of her hands with the palm up. There was a bright flash of fire, and out of nowhere she was suddenly holding a large sphere of what looked to him to be a shiny dark metal. She took the sphere to the stump of Naruto's arm and pressed the two together. His eyes widened as the metal seemed to become fluid before covering the remainder of the boy's arm. Naruto writhed in pain as the black metal destroyed what remained of his arm, and Amaterasu stroked her hand through his hair, shushing him quietly while the metal bonded to his torso, providing a black covering over the edge of his pectoral and collarbone. He continued to toss and turn in her lap as out of the now flat stump more black liquid started to flow before solidifying. Hiruzen couldn't tear his eyes away as the black fluid solidified into a perfect replacement for the bones of Naruto's arm. Once the bones were finished forming, what looked like thousands of tiny black threads shot out and coiled around the bones, forming an exact facsimile of his muscles. With the reconstruction finished, Naruto settled back into Amaterasu's lap. Now, Amaterasu said quietly, I may not be able to heal him, but someone else can. There was a flash of fire as the goddess teleported someone else into the office, and Hiruzen couldn't keep the shock off his face when he heard a familiar voice shout. Shizune. More sake. Damn, I must have passed out again, Tsunade said to herself. After all, how else would she explain happily drinking her ghosts away in a bar on the other side of the land of fire one moment only to suddenly appear in her old sensei's office the next? You're not dreaming, Tsunade, Hiruzen said from his position on the floor. Tsunade turned to face her old mentor and noted how he was kneeling over the lap of some regal-looking woman. The look of contempt on the woman's face set her on edge. Then how did I suddenly wind up in the last place I would ever want to be? That would be my doing. Tsunade turned her attention to the haughty-looking woman and was about to give a scathing retort when she took notice of the boy laying in her lap. She felt every one of her muscles lock up at the sight of his broken and bloody form before she started trembling from head to toe. The ghost she had been so desperately trying to drown just a few minutes ago. He's even smaller than Nawaki was, she thought dimly. Visions of the past rose unbidden in her mind's eye. She barely heard Hiruzen calling her name or the stranger sitting above him speaking as the memory of her beloved brother's laughter filled her ears. She remembered his vibrant smile, and the determined fire in his eyes whenever he puffed up his little chest in pride and declared loudly to all who would listen his dream of one day becoming Hokage and protecting everyone. Eventually, though, her mind started to go down the same inevitable path it always did when she caught herself reminiscing her brother or her fiancé. Images of his dead and mutilated body flashed before her eyes. Her breathing quickened when the images became more gruesome and horrible as her imagination showed her how much pain he must have been in while he screamed for her over and over. A ring of darkness steadily grew from the edge of her vision, and before she knew it she was engulfed in the sweet release of unconsciousness. Drip. Drip. She opened her eyes and looked around only to find herself, Hiruzen, and the strange woman holding the boy standing around in some sort of sewer. Strangely though, The boy was now bereft of any of the wounds she had seen on him previously. Though now she did note that his right arm seemed to be comprised of some strange, dark, metal cables coiled together to form the muscles of the arm. Seeing that the source of her anxiety was gone, Tsunade immediately scowled as she regained her senses. "All right, Sarutobi-sensei, what's going on?" she demanded. "Where are we, and why would you show me something like that?" Hiruzen opened his mouth to reply but was promptly cut off by the haughty stranger. "Tsunade Senju, as I said before, I brought you to me. I examined the memories of your sensei and he seems to think rather highly of your abilities in the healing arts. It was originally intended for you to heal the boy I carry with me, but after witnessing your rather visceral reaction upon seeing the state he was in, I find myself housing doubts as to the quality of your skills." Tsunade growled and clenched her fist as this stranger stood before her and had the gall to insult one of the few things about herself she still took pride in. "Look, lady, I don't know who you are, but if you took a dive through Sarutobi-sensei's memories, you should have found two things. I'm the best damn medic in the world, everyone thinks highly of my skills, and given that you must now know what I've been through, I have no loyalty or obligation to Konoha or its people." "This isn't about Konoha, Tsunade," Hiruzen exclaimed. "This is about a little boy who has suffered far too much and who needs your help." "For what? He looks fine now." Once again her mentor was cut off as the strange woman turned without warning and started walking deeper into the depths of the sewer. "Hey, where are you going? There's one other who must be privy to what I am about to say, and I do not wish to repeat myself," the woman said coolly without even looking over her shoulder. Not seeing any other option, Tsunade exchanged a brief look with her old mentor before they both took off after her. "Hey, lady," she called as they caught up with the woman. "At least tell us where we are." As they walked, the sound of wind gusting at periodic intervals steadily grew louder and Tsunade couldn't shake the feeling of trepidation slowly crawling up her spine. "We are in young Naruto's mindscape," the woman answered. "That's why he suddenly isn't injured," Tsunade concluded. The woman nodded, but it seemed like Hiruzen was only put on edge. "But if we're in Naruto's mindscape, then that means..." He was cut off as the narrow corridor suddenly opened up into an endlessly expansive room and a deep, menacing chuckle echoed around them, shaking both student and master. Their eyes were drawn to the far side of the room where behind a massive cage with a paper bearing the symbol for seal sat over the lock. Behind the bars of the cage, a massive pair of glowing red eyes slowly opened, followed by a feral Cheshire grin comprised entirely of razor-sharp fangs. "So, after 8 years my warden finally deigns me worthy of a visit." A deep, unending feeling of malice followed the booming voice and Tsunade looked over to see even Hiruzen struggling to remain standing under the titanic pressure of the creature's chakra and killing intent. "And it seems he even brought me some snacks. Kyubi, enough with the theatrics," the woman ordered calmly. Tsunade's eyes widened as she put the pieces together. It seemed that even in Konoha, Jinchuriki were hard-pressed to escape from living a life of suffering. "Even you can see that the boy will not awaken until I allow it." "Then why come here?" the beast asked with no small amount of disdain. "Even creatures as dim as you should recognize the danger of entering my container's mind." "Be wary of your tone, fox," the woman said with narrowed eyes. "I have been shown more disrespect on this night than I would normally allow, and my patience for it, even in ignorance, grows thin." Tsunade was shocked that someone could address the strongest of the tailed beasts with such derision. Her shock grew as the fox roared in anger and the pressure of its chakra increased, forcing both her and Hiruzen to their knees while the massive killing intent made her shake with fear. "Why would show you? Who are no more than insects scurrying below the feet of a being such as I, any respect. All you do is lie and manipulate and control. Because of you I was forced into imprisonment for a third time with naught but scant moments to enjoy my freedom before being forced into enslavement and captured once more. Her surprise only grew when the woman remained unfazed by the massive wave of fury the fox was emitting, only narrowing her eyes before the pressure and killing intent were forcibly pushed back. Not a moment later, the woman focused her own pressure upon the fox, and even though the beast was the focal point of her ire, Tsunade found herself pressed flat against the ground as the woman's pressure made that of the fox feel like nothing more than being a few feet underwater. Even the Kyuubi itself was forced to the floor under the gargantuan pressure of the woman's power. Her voice was calm and collected, but resounded loudly off the walls while contain a hidden fire underneath. You may be one of the most powerful beings on this plane, Kyuubi, but your arrogance and bitterness will not be tolerated in my presence. My name is Amaterasu, goddess of the sun. You will listen to what I have to say, and you will respect the situation in which you all find yourselves. Do I make myself clear? Why yes, Amaterasu-sama. The Kyuubi replied, for once, in a tone bereft of malice. Amaterasu smiled and the unbelievable pressure vanished in an instant. Good. She waited for Tsunade and Hiruzen to return to their feet before indicating they follow her further into the room. They came to a stop less than 20 feet from the bars of the Kyuubi's cage. She then took a seat on the floor, laying Naruto down in her lap and stroking his hair. Now, I will repeat what I said to Hiruzen Sarutobi when I first arrived in his office. Normally, beings such as I do not interfere with the goings-on of the inhabitants of this plane. But, there is something coming. I cannot tell what exactly, but I do know it will affect all I have created on this world. Knowing this, I journeyed to your plane to try and find one worthy of receiving my blessing in hopes they will help protect my creations. And you think my container is worthy? Kyuubi asked skeptically. That remains to be seen. I had hoped to do this after he had awoken, but due to certain unforeseen circumstances, she turned her gaze upon Tsunade, and the legendary Sannin felt herself flushing in shame. I had to adjust my plans. Instead, you three will bear witness while I speak with him. He will not be aware of your presence, but hopefully, you all will gain something from hearing this boy's words. As Amaterasu finished, Tsunade noticed the boy beginning to stir in her lap. Amaterasu looked down at him and smiled softly as he slowly opened his eyes with a groan. Hello, Naruto-kun. Naruto finally opened his eyes and Tsunade saw the brightest pair of blue eyes shining back at the goddess. Hi, Kami-sama. Amaterasu chuckled and continued to run her hand through his spiky blonde hair. Why do you call me that? Well, you're being real nice to me, though that might be because I'm dreaming. You saved me from those villagers, you look really strong. Like stronger than Gigi and he's the strongest in the village. Also you're really pretty. Almost as pretty as Tenshi-chan. Amaterasu raised an eyebrow curiously. Tenshi-chan. Naruto's smile grew into the picture of happiness, and Tsunade couldn't help but smile at the sight of it. Yeah, you sent her to me right? An image of a young girl floated in the air above Naruto. She was maybe 5 or 6 years older than him with long black hair and deep crimson eyes. Beside her, Hiruzen chuckled and she turned to face him inquisitively. That's Kurenai Yuhi, he informed them. She's just made Chunin and is thought to be on the fast track to Jonin due to her prodigious skill in genjutsu. Sometimes she brings me food when I can't find her and she's the nicest person that I ever met. Whenever she comes to visit my box, She uses a special jutsu that makes the villagers stay away. Also, when she smiles, you should see it, Kami-sama. It's like everything that makes me sad isn't there anymore. Amaterasu laughed at the display of enthusiasm Naruto showed when talking about the girl he was clearly enamored with. Hey, since this is a dream, do you think you could bring her here too? Why do you think this is a dream, Naruto-kun? Amaterasu asked, curious as to how the bow came to that conclusion. Well, I can't really tell where we are since it's just you and me here, but I don't think I'm in the hospital. Naruto explained. Also, I can talk too. I couldn't when you found me, remember? Those guys cut up my neck so I couldn't scream when they attacked me. That reminds me, are you the one who gave me this new arm? He reached up and watched as the strange black muscles on his hand moved with his fingers. It's really cool. Tsunade found herself shaking with the casual way the boy talked about being dismembered and having his vocal cords cut out, as if it was a common occurrence. She turned to her fellow observers, saw similar looks of rage. They told me he was safe in the orphanage, Hiruzen muttered lowly. Meanwhile the Kyuubi was merely glowering, though she could feel a low rumble shaking the ground beneath her coming from the cage. She turned her attention back to the goddess and the child as Amaterasu spoke. You're welcome, Naruto. I'm glad you like it. Now, I have a question for you. How would you like to receive a gift from me? What do I got to give you for it? Naruto replied almost immediately. Why do you think you would need to give me anything? Amaterasu asked. Tsunade was saddened by the lack of trust in someone as young as Naruto. Well, even though I know you're not like the villagers who would try to rip me off or give me something dangerous, I still think you want me to give you something in return. My box used to be under another kid's window, and sometimes I could hear his mom tell him stories at night. In one of them you give some guy a magic sword and in exchange he gives you a part of his heart. This made Amaterasu burst into laughter as she pulled Naruto even closer to her still. The boy didn't seem to mind as he buried his head in her chest in an attempt to soak up as much affection as he could. It seems you are too wise for my tricks, Naruto-kun, Amaterasu said once she had calmed down. Naruto simply smiled proudly and puffed out his chest at her praise. Of course I am. You're talking to the future Hokage of Konoha. Besides, I'm way smarter than that guy in the story. Oh, how so? Amaterasu asked, and Tsunade started to fear for the boy as his arrogance might lead to an unhappy goddess. 'Cause, in the story you said he had to give you a part of his heart and you would give him his magic sword. He gave you the part that let him feel love, which is dumb. What's the point of being strong if you don't have any precious people to protect? The simplistic idealism would have made Tsunade snort and laugh at its naivete had she heard it before entering Naruto's mindscape, but the way he said it and the fiery determination burning behind his eyes in spite of what he'd been through made her think that maybe Dan and Naoki might not have been so foolish after all. Alright, Naruto-kun, Amaterasu said after a moment of thought, in exchange for whatever you desire, what part of your heart would you give me? That's easy, Naruto stated smugly. Instead of the part of me that feels love, I'll give you the part that feels hate. Amaterasu laughed once more and Tsunade couldn't help but smile herself at the simple brilliance of it. The boy was so determined to reach his goal of being a protector that any feelings that, while completely justifiable in her opinion, would get in the way of it. That's a great choice, Naruto-kun. Now, what do you want in exchange? Naruto frowned in concentration for a couple of minutes as he thought her offer through. Tsunade was on the edge of her metaphorical seat as she imagined what sort outlandish thing was about to be created out of the combination of a child's imagination and a goddess power. In exchange, I want. Naruto paused again as he seemed to go through his train of thought one more time before continuing. To know how to read. Even the mighty Kyuubi couldn't keep its eyes from widening upon hearing Naruto's request. He does know he can ask for anything, right? Tsunade asked the room in general. Amaterasu managed to control her surprise but did raise an eyebrow in curiosity. Are you sure, Naruto-kun? She asked. Naruto grinned and nodded enthusiastically. Yup. They never taught me to read at the orphanage before I got kicked out, so I figure you can teach me. Why not have one of your friends teach you? Well, Gigi is too busy, Naruto explained. This made Hiruzen drop his head in shame at failing his surrogate grandson once again. Ayame Nichan and Tuki Ojisan have their shop, and they lose enough customers as it is by serving me. I don't wanna get them in more trouble by being seen teaching me stuff. Tenshi-chan might teach me, but I don't see her often enough, and when I do I wanna do other stuff with her. Amaterasu nodded sadly at his reasoning. Clearly, the boy was almost selfless to a fault due to his poor treatment convincing him he lacked self-worth. And what would you do if I gave you the ability to read? Naruto frowned in thought for a moment. Well, I wanna be a shinobi so I can keep Gigi and my other precious people safe. And if I wanna help keep Gigi safe, that means I have to be really strong like him. But Gigi is also called the professor by lots of people, which I think means he's really smart. So, if I wanna be a great shinobi, that means I have to get really smart as well as really strong. So Kami-sama, I guess the first thing I would do if you taught me how to read is sneak into the library and read everything there. Then I could train and make myself stronger in secret. Why in secret, Naruto-kun? Because, that way no one will know how strong I am, and the villagers won't get more scared of me and hurt me more. At this point Tsunade had tears in her eyes as she listened to everything Naruto said. She knew the life of a Jinchuriki was not an easy one, but to hear such atrocities were committed against such a pure, kind-hearted boy made her chest ache with sadness as she wanted nothing more than to hold the boy in her arms. Amaterasu smiled as she leaned down and kissed Naruto on the forehead, making the boy blush and giggle from the soft affection before a rush of information flooded his brain. There you go, Naruto-kun. You can now read anything and understand what it is saying. Thank you, Kami-sama, Naruto replied quietly, his face glowing with happiness. Now he was going to be able to be the strongest shinobi ever and protect all his precious people. Are you sure this was all you wanted from me, Naruto-kun? Amaterasu asked. I can see in your heart that there is still something you desire. The smile dropped from Naruto's face as he shifted uncomfortably in Amaterasu's lap. Well, I mean, there is one other thing I've always wanted, but I can't ask you for it. Oh, and what is it that you want that even I cannot give you? Amaterasu asked curiously. Naruto looked down and Tsunade barely kept herself from crying out when she saw the pain in his eyes and heard the loneliness in his voice. I'd really like to have a mom. But I can't ask you for that, because it wouldn't be fair to her if she was forced to take care of me. Tears started leaking out of his eyes and Naruto struggled to make his shaky voice audible. I would want her to love me and take care of me because she wanted to, not because she had to. Finally, his composure was broken and a sob ripped its way out of his throat. Amaterasu held him close and whispered soft comforts in his ear as she stroked his hair. Within minutes he had returned to a peaceful slumber and she slowly stood up with him in her arms before addressing the rest of the group. I believe it is safe to say that this boy is worthy of receiving my blessing, she said looking each of them in the eye. Amaterasu-sama, Kyuubi rumbled, its deep voice tinged with what might have passed for sadness. I request that you show me the memories of my container. I wish to see for myself the state of the life he has been living. Amaterasu nodded and walked forward towards the cage. Very well, Kyubi. Tsunade and Hiruzen watched with bated breath as a claw the size of a small house descended between the bars and, with more care and control than they thought possible of a living natural disaster, gently touched the tip against Naruto's forehead. There was a momentary flash before the massive chakra and furious killing intent forced both legendary shinobi to their knees as the fox threw itself bodily at the bars of its cage. Let me out. I will raze that village to the ground for the crimes it has committed. To inflict such suffering on a child deserves nothing less than the most painful of deaths. I will show them the true power of a demon. And this time it will be of my own free will. That's quite enough, Kyubi, Amaterasu ordered. If you truly feel for the boy, you can help him achieve his goals. Amaterasu-sama, I swear to you, for all this boy has seen in such a short time, I will give him unfettered access to whatever chakra I can. I will even help him control it when the time comes. Amaterasu seemed pleased with the Kyubi's words as she took a few steps forward and placed her hand on the center of the cage. Her hand glowed briefly and the Kyubi's giant red eyes widened from the darkness of its seal. I have restored your yin half, Kyubi. You are now back to your original strength, and while I'm sure you are more than aware that your ability to corrode the seal before you has dramatically increased, you have made an oath to me. Do not take it lightly. If possible, the Kyubi had grown even larger than it already was before as it nodded its gargantuan head in understanding. Turning around, Amaterasu addressed the other two. With that business done, I believe it is time we return to the physical plane. Tsunade felt a strange tug from behind her navel as darkness engulfed her, and before she knew it they were all back in the Hokage's office. This time she didn't even flinch at the sight of the blood-covering Naruto from head to toe before rushing to kneel in front of him next to her old sensei. She immediately started healing him, her eyes continuously returning to his soft, peaceful face as she worked. How is he doing? Hiruzen asked quietly. It's not good, Tsunade replied. He's suffered major blood loss and there's traces of tetanus in his system, though the Kyubi's chakra is helping to destroy it. This new arm of his is very interesting. It seems to be some sort of almost organic metal and even has its own chakra pathways. The rest of his wounds seem to be healing rather quickly, though there is going to be some pretty extensive scarring. The worst is his throat, though. Even with Kyubi's help, the damage to his vocal cords is too extensive to perfectly repair. It's unlikely he'll be able to speak more than a hoarse whisper, if at all. Tsunade continued working extensively, even as Amaterasu leaned down to plant yet another kiss on Naruto's forehead. Her eyes didn't even leave her work as a bright flash of light originated from where the goddess had kissed him, or when she gently slid him off her lap and stood up. In fact, it wasn't until she had stabilized him and Naruto was lying peacefully on the couch that she even cast a glance at the other two standing over her. Amaterasu, happy that Tsunade's work was done and she had both their attention, reached inside the sleeve of her kimono and pulled out a simple-looking scroll with an ornate white and orange seal on it. I have found Naruto Uzumaki to be truly worth of receiving my blessing, she declared, handing Hiruzen the scroll. I have bestowed upon him the power of a true leader, and in this scroll are the teachings necessary for him to master that power. Hiruzen opened the scroll and read the first few lines. The Kunshugen, he read. Monarch I, well, isn't that an appropriate name, Tsunade quipped before turning her attention back to Naruto. She didn't fight the soft smile that rose to her face. Her mind made up, She turned back to face her old mentor, a look of resolution on her face. Sarutobi-sensei, I wish to adopt Naruto Uzumaki. Her determination quickly turned to anger when Hiruzen sighed loudly before walking around his desk and slumping in his chair. I cannot allow you to do that, Tsunade. What do you mean you can't do that? Tsunade exclaimed. You heard him in his mindscape. The one thing he wants most in life is to have a mother who chooses to love him and take care of him, and the moment someone asks to fill that role, you shoot them down. Your sensei is correct, Tsunade Senju, Amaterasu said quietly. While I applaud your resolve, you must still prove yourself capable of surmounting the ghosts of your past and the vices you used to escape them. I know I don't come across as the most reliable person, and objectively I probably seem like the last person you want raising a child, Tsunade replied, but when I look at Naruto, when I see the fire in his eyes, I see what Dan and Nawaki were talking about. I believe that he can succeed where they failed, and I want to be there to care for and guide him on that path. And I'll do anything to be given that privilege. Amaterasu took a step and stood right in front of Tsunade, staring her in the eyes. The deep searching expression on her face made Tsunade feel like the very depths of her soul were being excavated and carefully examined. After a minute of tense silence, Amaterasu smiled and stepped away to look at Hiruzen. Your words speak truth, Tsunade Senju. Hokage-san, perhaps there is a compromise to be reached. Hiruzen closed his eyes for a moment and thought about their current situation. Even if I wanted to, the civilian council has almost complete power over Naruto as he is currently a normal citizen. By the time I wrestle that control back, he would already have passed the academy. That being said, there is an alternative solution, though I know you won't like it. Tsunade's resolve was unshaken. It doesn't matter what it is, I'll do it. Ooh. Iruka blew out a sigh and readjusted the files of the various genin graduates in his hands as he walked down the hall towards the meeting room in the Hokage Tower. Today had been a roller coaster of emotions. It had started fairly well, with a decent amount of his students having exceeded his expectations. One in particular made his chest swell with pride. Naruto Uzumaki. When they had first met, he originally despised the boy. Not because he was ignorant enough to mistake him for what he contained, but simply knowing that the cause of his parents' deaths was sealed inside his stomach made every time he so much as looked at Naruto a painful reminder of what he had lost. That quickly changed though when he saw the hell the rest of the village put Naruto through, and despite all that, the big smile never seemed to leave his face. It was humbling in a way to see the lengths Naruto had to go to just to collect enough meager scraps to repair the damage that was frequently done to his small apartment, let alone find enough food to eat. Iruka had tried over and over to report these crimes to the Hokage, but no matter how hard they tried, they simply couldn't find enough proof. And while Naruto easily wormed his way into Iruka's heart, despite his constant pranks and acts of truancy, there was something that told him that he had barely scratched the surface of the enigma that Naruto Uzumaki. On occasion he would see behind the mask, and the young man who often acted more mature than most adults would make an appearance. On others he would see Naruto enthusiastically trying to explain something new he had learned in the library to the owners of their favorite ramen stand. He knew that the Hokage given Naruto unrestricted access to the most of the library, even going so far as to give him a key to the building and threatening those working there that they did not have the authority to deny service to anyone, as it was a public resource and technically under the Hokage's jurisdiction. However, even though he would sometimes catch glances of Naruto's avaricious desire to learn and read whatever he could, the boy's grades were still abysmal and he rarely actually saw him with a book. Shaking his head of his ruminations with a yawn, followed by a wince from where his traitorous assistant had impaled him with a Fuma shuriken. He reached forward and opened the door to the Hokages. Walking in, he placed the files on the desk, making sure to include the one extra. He was dismissed with a wave as the Hokage began looking through the files. Bowing, he left the office, hoping against hope that the one extra graduate would still manage to find a team of his own. Ooh. Hiruzen kept his face neutral as he looked at those gathered before him. Now, before we begin the discussion of team assignments, are there any among you who would like to make specific requests? He watched as Kakashi Hatake, Kurenai Yuhi, and his own son Asuma stepped forward. Kakashi was the first to speak. Hokage-sama, I request that Naruto Uzumaki be placed on my team. Kurenai was next as she stepped up next to Kakashi and bowed. Hokage-sama, I too request Naruto Uzumaki, as well as Hinata Hyuga. This made Kakashi and many others raise an eyebrow in curiosity as he knew they had all read Naruto's file and was sure he would be the only one to request him. Asuma was last as he too bowed. Hokage-sama, I request to be placed with the next generation of Ino Shikacho. Deciding to deal with the easiest issue first, Hiruzen leveled his gaze on his son. For what reason do you make this request, Jonin Sarutobi? Asuma took a slow drag of his cigarette and blew it out before answering. I think I would be valuable in molding the next generation of Konoha's most strategically solid team. Hiruzen thought over Asuma's request while ignoring the itch to reach for his own pipe as he inhaled the smoke from his son's cigarette. Coming to a decision, he grabbed the appropriate files and stamped them. Request granted. Asuma Sarutobi, you have been officially designated Jonin Sensei of Team 10, consisting of Ino Yamanaka, Shikamaru Nara, and Choji Akamichi. Asuma bowed and thanked him before exiting the room. Now, Jonin Yuhi, you have already expressed and explained your desire to train the Hyuga heiress, so I will begin by granting that one. Thank you, Hokage-sama, Kurenai said as she bowed once more. As for the matter of Naruto Uzumaki, he noted how several of the gathered Jonin scowled at the mention of his surrogate grandson and found his resolve reaffirmed. Normally, due to his position as dead last, he would be held back until a spot opened up either on another genin team or next year's class graduated. However, seeing as multiple requests have been made for his presence on different teams, I will hear both of your reasons before making my decision. Jonin Hatake, why do you think you should have Genin Uzumaki on your team? I believe that, as Konoha's premier ninjutsu specialist, I am the most qualified to teach Genin Uzumaki, as his unnaturally large chakra reserves as well as the addition of the Kyuubi's chakra gives him a unique edge in that field. Additionally, I believe that his distaste for Sasuke Uchiha can be molded into a rivalry that will propel Sasuke to new heights, so long as he thinks Naruto's skills are right behind him. So you would intentionally train him to be weaker just to make the Uchiha stronger? Kurenai demanded. Hokage-sama, if given permission to train Genin Uzumaki, I believe that he can become a great shinobi as well as provide much-needed confidence to his teammates, helping pull them up with him. Yuhi-san, I never said I would sabotage Naruto's career. I will still train him to be a strong shinobi. I was simply saying that he should be kept where he can nip at Sasuke's heels in order to drive him to become the best he can be. Besides, with the Byakugan on your team, you will be more suited towards a tracking team. I recommend the Inuzuka and Aburame heirs. Kakashi said, a hint of condescension tinging his relaxed tone. At least I wouldn't use him as nothing more than a stepping stone for one of his teammates. Kurenai retorted angrily. That's enough. Hiruzen said coolly before the situation could devolve further. Kurenai, Kakashi has a point. Your team is going to be better suited for tracking, and for that reason I am denying your request. Kurenai gaped at the Hokage. She had desperately wanted to see the boy she hadn't seen for years again. After making Chunin, she had been so busy with missions that she hardly got to see him anymore. She had visited the box he had last been using for shelter several times and had even taken to searching the village before she had learned that he had moved into a small apartment in the red light district. Strangely enough, it became even harder to find him even though he had acquired a permanent place of residence. In fact, except for the almost weekly uproar of chaos due to one of his many pranks, almost no one saw Naruto outside of the academy. Now she had just lost the chance to be able to see him regularly once again. She was about to protest the Hokage's order when he turned to address Kakashi. Jonin Hatake, your request has also been denied. I will not have one of my genin used for the sole purpose of escalating another. Instead, it seems that, as originally intended, genin Uzumaki will be assigned to the one who made the first request for him, years ago. And who would that be, Hokage-sama? Kakashi asked. He may not have shown it, but deep down he was upset that he would not be able to train the son of the man who was like a second father to him. His question was answered when the door opened and the last person any of them expected walked through. Naruto woke up early, despite not being able to get to sleep until late last night. He had finally done it. He was a shinobi and one step closer to accomplishing his goal. Turning off his alarm, he slipped out of bed and prepared himself for his last day at the academy. He quickly scarfed down a quick breakfast of stale bread and cheese and thought about all that had happened in the last 5 years. After waking up in the Hokage's office and seeing the two strangers standing over him, he quickly tensed before realizing that one of them had been the goddess from his dream. He was happy to find that whatever had happened in his dream was real as he looked at his surrogate grandfather's robes hanging on the rack near his desk and could actually understand them as opposed to simply knowing by instinct that they read Third Hokage. His happiness had quickly been quashed though when he had tried to exclaim his joy at his newfound skill only for a raspy croak to escape his throat. The nice blonde lady, who he learned was named Tsunade, had crouched down to look him in the eye and explain that despite her best efforts, the damage to his vocal cords was just too great. Upset at the loss of not just an arm, but also his voice, Naruto had been surprised to find the nice lady hugging him. When he had calmed down and they finally separated, Tsunade had told him that it was time for her to leave, but she would see him again in a month to check on his throat and how his body was dealing with his new arm. Then the goddess from his dream had knelt in front of him and explained that her name was Amaterasu and she expected great things from him before disappearing in a flash of white fire with Tsunade. After that, he pretty much spent the next 5 years either in the library, at his apartment, in the academy, or in one of his many hiding places reading. He had kept his replacement arm a secret as he was bullied enough for being practically mute. He didn't need the villagers thinking he was a cripple too. Shaking his head, Naruto focused on the present, leaving the past behind as he opened his closet and skipped right over his trademark orange jumpsuit. Now that he was a shinobi of Konoha, he wasn't under the thumb of the civilian half of the village anymore, and he no longer had to hide himself behind the mask of a happy-go-lucky dunce to keep them from becoming wary of his growth. Instead he donned himself in a tight, long-sleeved chain mesh shirt, over which he wore a black hoodie with an orange swirl on the back that was gifted to him by Tsunade on one of her monthly checkups, as well as the dark orange scarf her apprentice, Shizune, had given him that same day. On his legs he wore a baggy pair of dark gray pants that reached just below his knees before being cinched shut around his shins. Below that were a pair of bandages covering the rest of his legs and a pair of sturdy, black slip-on shoes. Finally ready, he slipped his burnt orange gloves over his hands, concealing the remainder of his artificial arm, tied his headband on and rushed out the door, making sure to lock it and activate his security seals on the way out. It took him no time at all to arrive at the academy. He entered the classroom where he had spent the better part of the last 5 years, looking straight ahead as he climbed the stairs and took a seat next to a blushing Hinata. He then proceeded to wait there quietly for Iruka to come in and announce the teams. The most he interacted with anyone there was to simply point at his forehead protector when Shikamaru asked him what he was doing there. He then went back to waiting quietly until Iruka came in minutes after Sakura and Ino, breaking them up and demanding silence. He didn't really listen as the teams were assigned, though he did smile and pat Hinata on the back when he learned she was going to be on a team with Kurenai. He hadn't really seen her in the last few years, seeing as she was often busy with missions and he was busy hiding from villagers while reading and learning anything he could get his hands on or training. He was happy though that she made Jonin and that she was going to be the sensei to the only girl in Naruto's class who hadn't been mean or cruel to him. And lastly, Iruka concluded, seeing as we have an uneven number, we normally place the odd man out with a team from the next year's class. Looks like the Dobi's out of luck again. Kiba shouted, much to the amusement of his peers. Serves him right, Sakura added. Dressing up all cool like Sasuke-kun when he's just a dead last. Naruto meanwhile didn't react. He had caught what Iruka said and was waiting for what he was getting at. He didn't have to wait long either as Iruka cleared his throat and continued. Actually, it seems that Naruto is going to be lucky. He has been requested to be a private apprentice and will therefore work individually with a sensei as well as operating as a backup team for any missions that see a sudden increase in difficulty outside of the mission's parameters. The class erupted in chaos as many of the other students voiced their disgust of the situation. It took several minutes and a particular judicious use of Iruka's demon head jutsu to finally get everyone settled down and explain that there was no way to change placements. Finally, a knock on the door managed to grab everyone's attention. Iruka opened the door and his along with almost everyone else's jaws dropped. Standing in the doorway with her arms crossed was none other than Tsunade Senju. Tsunade-sama. Iruka stuttered before bowing quickly in respect. You've returned to the village. I have, replied Tsunade as she stepped past Iruka to glare at the gathered graduates. Naruto couldn't contain his smile as her eyes fell on him and softened before returning to its previous glare. So these are this year's batch of academy graduates. You all don't look like much to me. I assure you, Tsunade-sama, Theses shinobi are ready. Iruka said as he stood next to her nervously. A few of them, maybe, Tsunade conceded. But at the moment I'm only interested in one of them, and that's my future apprentice. The air seemed to freeze as everyone in the room tried to process what she had just said before erupting in anger. Tsunade-sama, you can't be serious. He's nothing but a dead last. He probably couldn't even survive training with you. Tsunade scowled as she listened to the various graduates insult her Naruto. Releasing a little bit of killing intent, she watched as they froze once more, this time in fear. Even Iruka was starting to sweat. The only one seemingly unaffected was Naruto as he flashed her with that foxy grin of his that made her heart swell. From where I'm standing, it almost seems like a group of newly graduated genin are questioning the decision of not just one of the 3 legendary Sannin but the Hokage as well. That doesn't strike me as a great start to your careers as shinobi of the leaf. The room was silent as she looked over the now thoroughly terrified students before stopping on Naruto, whose hands moved quickly as he signed to her. That shut them up fast. She smirked inwardly at his wit, but scowled when one of the genin stood up. She identified him as Sasuke Uchiha, and knew right away from the look on his face that she didn't like him. He had that same haughty expression she had seen 5 years earlier in her old mentor's office, only this child didn't have the benefit of godhood to justify his superiority. Tsunade-san, I believe there was a mistake. The dobi there is the dead last of this class, and in fact failed the graduation exam for his 3rd time in a row. I don't know how he managed to procure a leaf headband, but as Rookie of the Year I'm sure you were supposed to be assigned me to be your apprenticeship. Tsunade was about to respond when Naruto slammed his hands on his desk and shot to his feet, signing so fast Tsunade only caught the gist of what he was saying, though she was touched that it seemed that he was incensed by the lack of respect being shown to her. Sasuke merely rolled his eyes at Naruto's silent outburst. HMPH, how many times do we have to tell you, Dobi, no one understands that made-up language of yours. Tsunade could hear a slight growl rising up through Naruto's throat and sensed the extra chakra being pumped to his limbs. He was just about to leap over the desks and show Sasuke just who the dead last was when Tsunade appeared in front of him and put a hand on his shoulder. He looked into her eyes, pleading her to understand why he was so angry. Nodding slightly, she tightened her grip on his shoulder and with a quick shunshin, warped them to one of the training grounds he used as a hiding place from the villagers. The moment they landed in a clearing at the center of Training Ground 43, Tsunade pulled him into a tight hug while Naruto returned the gesture. They stood like that for several minutes before Naruto pulled away, a slightly embarrassed look on his face. Though he would never admit it, Tsunade knew how much Naruto was starved for physical affection, and she always found it cute when he would get embarrassed by it. So, failed your exam for a 3rd time, huh? Naruto smiled sheepishly and scratched the back of his head while a breathy chuckle passed his lips. Yeah, I couldn't find any way to control my chakra enough to make a stable clone, Naruto signed as they both took a seat. His face turned sheepish once more before continuing. Do you think I could talk to you? Tsunade chuckled and shuffled a bit so her back was against a nearby tree. She then grabbed Naruto and easily pulled him over to sit between her legs. She noticed that he had grown since she had last seen him, though he was still several inches shorter than her. If she had to guess, he was probably standing a decent 5'3". So how'd you work around your clone problem? She listened intently, her head on his shoulder as a quiet, raspy voice answered her, shadow clones. And just where did you learn a Jonin-level technique? She asked. Forbidden Scroll, Naruto replied. Mizuki Tem tried to trick me into stealing it. So, I told Gigi. Together we laid a trap for the Tem, and cuz Gigi knew about my trouble with clones, he said I could try to learn the first jutsu from the scroll while I waited. I had just managed to get it down when Iruka-sensei arrived. Naruto paused, both to give his throat a break and because of the emotions that welled up when he remembered how close one of his precious people had come to dying that night. Tsunade tightened her arms around him both, silently providing him both comfort and understanding. You don't have to continue if you don't want to, Naru-kun, she whispered. I read the report, I know what happened after. So, it's true then. Naruto croaked. I have the Kyuubi sealed in me. I'm afraid so, Tsunade replied softly. Now that you know, though, what are you gonna do? Naruto was silent for several minutes as he thought, and Tsunade took the opportunity to do her usual checkup to make sure the arm Amaterasu had given him was behaving as it should, as well as check his vocal cords. She was glad to see the arm was as strong as ever and that Naruto's body was not rejecting it. In fact, she could have sworn that the artificial nervous system inside the prosthetic that let Naruto control it was slowly getting more and more complicated. As for his vocal cords, she was happy to hear him talking for such a long amount of time without breaks. It meant he was steadily improving, and while he may never be rid of the quiet raspy quality in his voice, or being able to shout at the top of his lungs, she was confident the day was coming when it would no longer hurt to express himself with more than just hand gestures. "I've decided that I'm not gonna use the Kyuubi's chakra," Naruto stated, surprising Tsunade. "Why not? It's not mine to use. If I ever meet the Kyuubi somehow, I may ask it if I can use some of its chakra with its permission, but that'll only be after I ask it why it attacked Konoha and figure out whether I can trust it." Tsunade considered telling him that the Great Fox had already sworn an oath to let him use its chakra, but figured it might be better for Naruto to grow under his own power first and have the Kyuubi itself give him permission. "That seems awfully wise of you, Naru-kun." Naruto leaned his head back against her and smiled brightly before shooting to his feet and turning to face her. "I'm ready to get started whenever you are, Suna-sensei," he signed quickly. "You asked for it, Naru-kun," Tsunade replied as she stood up and slipped into her preferred fighting stance. Ooh. They spent that afternoon sparring, though that largely consisted of Tsunade beating him around the forest like a rag doll. After several rounds, Tsunade was happy to see Naruto quickly figuring out the trick to the shadow clone technique, and found that with each shadow clone she destroyed, her young apprentice's skills steadily increased. By the time they stopped for dinner, Naruto had actually managed to tap her with the palm of his hand, something she hadn't expected to happen for a while yet, even if she was holding back quite a bit. They left the training ground and headed for Ichiraku's. Naruto couldn't tell what he was happier about at the moment, the mountain of ramen he was currently shoveling into his mouth, or the fact that one of his most precious people was not only going to be staying in Konoha to be his sensei, but was also paying for the mountain of ramen he was currently shoveling into his mouth. He listened attentively though as Tsunade outlined their training schedule for the next few weeks. Every day started with physical training all morning, then, after lunch, they would spend 3 hours a day trying out new techniques and then another 3 hours of sparring before breaking for dinner. Meanwhile, both of them sent shadow clones to complete several D-rank missions, and Naruto had several others reading, studying, or practicing techniques learned during the 3 hours after lunch. Every Friday, Tsunade had said they would practice with another genin team after lunch, as they were a backup team and would therefore need to work well with every team. Finally, on Saturdays, Naruto would remove the resistance seals he had started putting on himself and they would spar with him, going all out in order for him to have proper control as well. After that, Sunday was used as a day off for errands and generally just hanging around. They had been following this schedule for nearly 4 weeks, and even though Naruto ended every day barely being able to stay on his feet, he couldn't be happier. He had a running joke with Tsunade that they were going to make Shizune, who had taken a leadership position at the hospital, retire before the third due to the stress of their weekly all-out spars inevitably ended with Naruto being hospitalized for the night. He was happily eating at Ichiraku's, alternating between devouring his food and enthusiastically signing to the 2 cooks about his training when Tsunade dropped by and told him she had finally gotten around to getting another genin team to agree to practice with them. That was how that Friday, Naruto found himself standing in training ground 8 staring at two of the most beautiful girls he had ever seen. He had never really spent a lot of time around Hinata, as she was very shy and tended to pass out around him, but seeing her now, ducking and weaving as she sparred with her teammates. He frowned as he watched her movements, though. Something about them seemed a little too stiff and unnatural for a girl who seemed to breathe poise and grace. His eyes moved away from the sparring match to the ethereal beauty standing not far off. If possible, Kurenai had only gotten more beautiful since the last time he had seen more than a passing glance of her. He could easily see the hidden strength lying beneath her soft, curvy frame. Her wild, dark mane reached midway down her back, and he could see the calm intelligence in her crimson eyes as she observed her students. His face heated up though as she suddenly turned and looked him in the eye, a big smile on her face as she called for her students to halt. Walking over, she had to resist the urge to rake her eyes over Naruto's surprisingly well-toned form. "It's good to see you again, Naruto-kun. I was afraid you had disappeared on me." She watched as Naruto moved his hands around wildly, only to frown when she heard Kiba shouting from behind her. "Oi, dumbass. What part don't you get about none of us understanding your stupid hand-talking thing?" She heard a quiet growl reverberate through Naruto's chest before he showed Kiba a particular one-fingered sign that everybody understood. He said, "It's good to see you as well, Tenshi-chan. I've missed your visits," Tsunade translated as she appeared behind her student. Kurenai bowed to her, hiding the blush that appeared on her cheeks at the familiar nickname, prompting her students to as well, while Naruto simply looked up and smiled at his sensei. "Tsunade-sama, I'm honored you chose our team to practice with," Kurenai said as she stood back up. "It's no problem, Kurenai-san," Tsunade replied. "I figured it would be good if Naruto's first joint practice was with at least a couple people he liked." Naruto tugged her sleeve to get her Tsunade's attention before quickly signing something that made her laugh. "What did he say?" Kurenai asked. "He said that Shino-san isn't so bad either, since he doesn't smell like wet dog." Kurenai and Hinata couldn't help but giggle slightly while Kiba huffed in exasperation. Even Shino seemed to have a small crinkle of happiness around his eyes. "Well, it seems the Hokage approves of the idea of a joint practice day, as he has actually assigned both us and Team 7 on our first C-rank mission tomorrow." "Really?" Tsunade asked. "And where would this be taking you?" "We're to escort a bridge builder back to the land of waves and protect him as he finishes construction on a bridge there." "Sounds like fun. I remember my team's first C rank," Tsunade said wistfully. Kurenai was about to inquire, sure that it would be good for her students to hear about how someone of Tsunade's stature had started, but was cut off when Naruto sighed loudly before signing to his sensei. "You'll have to forgive Naruto, he's heard this story several times and is eager to get started." Kurenai nodded in understanding. "Well, seeing as you're the one who proposed this, why don't you explain what's going to happen, Tsunade-sama?" Tsunade nodded before addressing the gathered genin. "We're gonna be doing a series of spars. The order will be Naruto versus you three in one-on-one matches, then rotating 2-on-2 matches until all of you have been partnered with each other, then rotating between Naruto against you three and two of you with Naruto against the other. After that it will be Naruto against you three and Kurenai, with me providing the occasional support, and finally it will be all of you against me." Kurenai giggled as Naruto's shoulders slumped and he let out what might have been a soundless groan, before taking a deep breath and puffing up his chest in determination. She watched as throughout the day Naruto wiped the floor with her students, all the while making it look like they were just barely losing. He even provided the occasional piece of advice, which Tsunade translated. So far the only match he had lost was the one where he was paired with Kiba and Akamaru, and that was only due to the pair hitting him in the back with a Gatsuga by accident. How is he so strong? Kurenai asked as she and Tsunade watched Naruto and his clones hold off all three members of her team. Furthermore, why is he holding back so much? To answer your first question, Tsunade replied, her eyes not leaving her student. He's always been far stronger than he's let on, and I'm not even sure he's aware of just how smart he really is. As for why he's holding back, it's because he actually wants to help his fellow shinobi get stronger. He knows they wouldn't learn anything if he tossed them around without even giving them a chance. Kurenai smiled at the thought of how selfless Naruto was for helping their team. Still, she was quite happy when it was finally her turn to join the fray and she could see Naruto putting in real effort to hold off her and her students at the same time. She grunted in annoyance as he once again broke free of her illusions just in time to stop her kunai. Her eyes widened in confusion as she readjusted her strike to go for his shoulder before he could stop it, and the blunted kunai glanced off his shoulder with a strange clanging sound while he didn't even seem fazed. Her moment of hesitation cost her as she took a ferocious punch to the gut before being thrown bodily by one of his clones. Eventually Tsunade called for the end of the match, and Kurenai couldn't help but be amazed by the lightly panting boy standing in front of her and her students, all of whom were in much worse condition. They had started strong, keeping Naruto on the defensive, but as time went on, they found him outmaneuvering them at almost every turn. Were it not for the fact that Kurenai had the advantage of being a full-grown jonin with years of experience, they would not have done nearly as well. The last match of the day had them all groaning in pain as they attempted over and over to do so much as lay a finger on Tsunade. Meanwhile she sent each of them careening across the training ground with nothing more than a tap of her hand or a flick of her finger. After another hour of this Tsunade finally called for a halt, thanking her and her students for helping with Naruto's training before master and apprentice took off for dinner while the members of Team 8 limped home to at least get a good night's sleep before their mission. Ooh! Naruto was excited as he and Tsunade walked out of the Hokage's tower. It was Wednesday, and he had just been treating his sensei to a home-cooked meal he had wanted to try making after reading it in one of the cookbooks in the library when the security seals told him he had a visitor. The Anbu at his door had of the Hokage requesting them for a mission, and now, because Teams 7 and 8 had encountered much greater resistance than anticipated, they were requesting more backup be sent as they had seen at least one Jonin level missing Nin and 3 Chunin level. They packed quickly, mostly thanks to Naruto's impressive skills with storage seals, and rushed out the gate. He was excited to finally get out of the village and see some more action than the occasional bandits they took out for practice, but Tsunade had easily beaten into his head the seriousness of facing enemy shinobi on a mission, particularly when so many of them were guaranteed to be at a higher level at least, officially, than him. They had left the village just after noon and were halfway to their destination when they decided to stop for the night. Naruto was somewhat annoyed that even without his seals his top speed didn't even make Tsunade break a sweat, but that just meant he had to keep training. They made a quick camp, with Tsunade pitching their tents while Naruto collected firewood while setting various traps and security seals around them. Tsunade had to admit that she was impressed with her students' aptitude for fuinjutsu. Naruto had always been a diligent learner, but his talent with the complex science of seal making truly did his surname justice. Already he was deconstructing, analyzing, and reconstructing seals that would take the average person years of focused study to even understand. Add in his liberal use of shadow clones, and Tsunade was fairly sure she was going to have to introduce Naruto to Jiraiya, though she was loath to introduce the boy she thought of as a son to the self-proclaimed super pervert. The next day went smoothly as they approached the land of waves until Naruto felt a sudden throbbing in his right arm. Gritting his teeth, he reached up to grab his shoulder, ignoring the fact that his prosthetic was unable to feel anything. The feeling passed, but he was unable to hide the fact that it happened from his sensei, who immediately brought them to a stop atop a tree branch to examine him. "What's the matter?" she asked, her voice a mixture of concern and professionalism. "Nothing," Naruto replied. "My arm just felt weird for a second back there." Tsunade activated a diagnostic jutsu and started running her hand over his arm and the area where it connected to his torso. "Weird how?" Naruto shrugged. "I dunno. There was this weird throbbing feeling, almost like. Like what? Like it was pulling me. Like my arm was telling me to go somewhere." Tsunade frowned in confusion. Could this be his body reacting to the metal of the arm in some new, strange way? Or was it a quirk of the still unidentifiable metal bestowed upon him by a literal deity? She didn't have much time to ponder these questions as she grabbed Naruto and dove off the tree toward the ground with them just in time to evade a wave of destructive energy that tore through where they were standing. Looking up, Tsunade saw a man standing in another tree above them smirking. The top of his head easily scraped the edge of 7 feet, and he was garbed in nothing but a baggy pair of black pants with a scratched-out mist forehead protector wrapped around his waist as a belt. His pale torso rippled with tightly compacted muscle while his dark beard connected seamlessly with his shaggy hair and almost completely covered his mouth. In general, his stout size and rugged appearance would have cast an intimidating figure were it not contrasted by his weapon of choice. In his left hand was an elegant double-edged straight sword. Its thin blade was composed of a gorgeous black metal, and the edges looked sharp enough to cut through almost anything. Unfortunately, its modest length of what could be no more than 2.5 feet made it look like little more than an oversized letter opener in the hands of the giant man. When Zabuza said to watch for any more reinforcements from Konoha, "I never expected to see a Sannin, of all people," the man remarked in a deep voice. "Naruto, stay back," Tsunade ordered. "This is Ryosuke Kuroda, Black Death of the Mist, and A-rank missing nin." "Well, I guess I don't have to introduce myself then," Ryosuke shouted as he swung his sword through the air, shooting a dark pulse of destructive energy at the both of them. Jumping out of the way, Tsunade tried to figure out how to get close enough to kill him without getting hit by the energy flowing out of his blade. The bingo books were never clear on what kind of energy the sword emitted, just that whatever it was, it destroyed anything in its path, acting as both offense and defense. "You know, picking a fight with a Sannin isn't a very smart idea," Tsunade yelled as she worked to figure out how to best take him out. If she tried a head-on assault, he'd just attack Naruto, forcing her to step in. Long-range attacks didn't work as the few ninjutsu she knew would easily be swept aside by his blade. There wasn't enough room to summon Katsuya, and releasing the seal on her forehead could jeopardize her mission if she tired herself out. She grunted as she dodged yet another wave of energy from his weapon, and remembered why exactly it was she had been happy with retirement. Landing near Naruto, she saw him gritting his teeth and holding his arm as he watched Ryosuke's every movement carefully. Naruto's arm screamed at him with phantom pain as he desperately watched his sensei jump around an opponent who she should have been able to deal with easily. He was well aware that he was the only thing keeping her from rushing in and wiping Ryosuke out with a single blow, as the second she did, he would just fire one of those waves of energy at him, and even now, without his seals, he would be hard-pressed to dodge it unscathed. The pain in his arm spiked and he was forced to his knees as Ryosuke laughed and raised his sword before his eyes. Even one of the legendary Sannin can't lay a finger on me with this, he exclaimed. I guess it's true what they say, this sword really is a gift from the gods. Naruto's eyes narrowed as he processed Ryosuke's words. Something about them struck a chord with him, and in his moment of distraction, he was unable to fight the strange pulling sensation flowing through his arms. Before he knew it, he was standing in between Tsunade and Ryosuke, ignoring their shouts for him to move and taunts respectively. Time seemed to slow as Ryosuke raised his arm to swing, and then, just as it reached its apex, it froze. If Naruto had the wherewithal to acknowledge his surroundings, he would have found that everything was frozen. From Ryosuke's arm, to Tsunade diving in to save him from his impending doom, to the smallest leaf in the trees, Naruto was treated to blissful stillness as he carefully examined the sword in his enemy's hand. His instincts told him he was right, but he had to be sure. Everything from the dark metal to the simple golded guard in the shape of a sun confirmed his suspicion. He smirked and everything started moving again as he allowed his arm to raise on its own, hand held out in front of him. Tsunade watched, stupefied as Ryosuke swung his arm down. However, instead of a wave of destruction being unleashed on her foolish student, it seemed that the blade itself was hurled out of his grasp. It spun through the air at almost supersonic speeds before coming to a sudden halt a second later in Naruto's hand. Not being one to waste an opportunity, buried her shock for the moment and rushed at Ryosuke, ending his life with a single punch to the chest. She quickly decapitated him and sealed the head away before turning to Naruto with a furious expression on her face. What part of "stay out of this" did you not understand? She screamed in anger. She didn't give him a chance to reply as she pulled him into a crushing hug. I don't know what I would do without, so please Naruto. Don't ever do something so reckless ever again. She barely heard him mutter his apology into her shoulder as she struggled to contain her tears. Pulling back, she looked down into his face before gasping in shock once more. Instead of their normal shining blue color, Naruto's eyes were now a cross between orange and gold that swirled loosely into the black of his pupil. She could still see blue in the negative space of the swirl, but it was now a darker, royal blue. Naruto, your eyes, she whispered. Unsealing a bowl and some water, she poured out a small amount of it and handed it to Naruto so he could look at his reflection. Naruto gasped and both sword and bowl clattered to the ground in his shock. What's happening to me? He signed rapidly. His hands were shaking and his face showed how afraid he was of what was happening to him. Sitting him down on a nearby tree that had fallen in the wake of their battle, she tried to find the best way to explain to him what was going on. Do you remember the day you and I met? She asked. When he nodded, she continued. That night, Amaterasu-sama gifted you with the ability to read in exchange for the part of your heart that felt hate, right? Another nod told her he was following her so far. Well, what you don't know is that because of your simple request, and your selfless attitude, she blessed you with a brand new dojutsu. You mean I have a bloodline now? Not exactly. Amaterasu-sama explained to Sarutobi-sensei and me that she had given you an ability called the Kunshugen and that it was a legendary dojutsu that had to be earned, not inherited. She also gave Sarutobi-sensei a scroll to help you train to use it. Naruto's face lit up at the thought of having his own special dojutsu that was and would always be unique to him. That's so cool. He signed happily. What does it do? Well, as far as we know, the primary ability of the Kunshugen is to make time stop for the user. However, the condition is that the user must remain completely still for the ability to work. Naruto frowned for a moment at the condition his newfound powers had. At first it seemed fairly useless. What was the point of an ability if you had to be completely still to use it? But then he started to really think about it. That's so awesome, he exclaimed happily. Now I have all the time in the world to think of what to do in any situation. Tsunade chuckled, happy her student appreciated the massive tactical benefits such an ability provided. They stayed in the clearing for another hour while Tsunade taught Naruto and about 200 clones how to properly channel chakra to his eyes. Once they were both sure that he had the skill down, they took off back towards their original destination. They arrived just before nightfall and Tsunade had to work hard to rein Naruto's disgust at the living situation of those around them. Having seen many towns like this one during her time in the war, Tsunade was a little more acclimated to being surrounded by so much despair. Even so, she couldn't abandon her oath, and once they found a doctor's office they decided to briefly stop to provide some help. Over the next couple hours, more and more people filtered into the office as word spread of a medic who was performing miracles for free. While she worked, Tsunade explained to Naruto what she was doing as well as occasionally asking him to help her diagnose someone. It saddened her that many of the people were suffering from various symptoms of malnourishment, and even she couldn't do more than recommend a healthier diet. Unfortunately, every patient's situation was the same. They were all living under the oppression of a tyrannical businessman named Gato, and he was quickly bleeding the entire country dry. By the time the 2-hour mark passed, Naruto was at his breaking point. Tsunade was healing a cut on a young girl's leg that one of Gato's thugs had given her when the doctor who ran the clinic walked in. "Thank you for your help, Tsunade-sama." Tsunade nodded as she finished up with the girl before ruffling her hair with a smile. "I'm sorry I couldn't do more, but even I'm limited when presented with such a lack of resources." "Nonsense." The doctor bowed graciously. "You've done more in a couple hours than I could normally accomplish in a week." Tsunade conceded the point and followed her student down the road as they continued towards their client's home. They arrived not long after, and when she knocked on the door, Naruto was happy to see Kurenai open the door. Seeing who it was, Kurenai dropped the kunai she was brandishing back into the pouch on her leg. "Tsunade-sama. Naruto-kun. I didn't expect you two to be our backup." Naruto waved to her with a grin before waving to Hinata and Shino, who were sitting with Kiba around a table with the members of Team 7 and 3 civilians. "Yes, well, the presence of at least 2 Jonin-level missing nin has escalated your mission level quite quickly," Tsunade explained. "You ran into another missing nin?" Kakashi inquired, his eyes only briefly leaving the book he was reading. Tsunade nodded and explained what had happened before they arrived. She left out the details of Naruto activating his Kushugen for the moment as there were too many ears in the room and she didn't want word spreading about it just yet. Naruto meanwhile went over to sit by Hinata and Shino. He quickly unsealed a pad of paper and a pen and wrote down a quick note before handing it to Hinata. "Anyo, it's good to see you as well, Naruto-kun," Hinata stuttered after reading the note. She and Shino then told him about what had happened so far while Kurenai debriefed Tsunade. They told him about their encounter with the Demon Brothers, and Kiba even joined in to boisterously add that the one they fought had been no match for their teamwork. Tsunade introduced herself and Naruto to Tazuna and his family. Tsunami smiled and bowed to Tsunade, saying she had heard word of her work at the clinic earlier that evening. Her son, though, was less enthusiastic about their arrival. "It doesn't matter who you are, or how many people you bring. he shouted as he slammed his hand on the table and shot to his feet. Gado's still just going to kill you. Like he does with anyone who stands in his way. I ask that you forgive my son, Tsunade-sama, Tsunami pleaded, her head down. Ever since Gado killed my husband, Inari has been having terrible mood swings. Tsunade waved off the apology. It's alright. I've seen many kids like him in my time. It's sad, but it's an unfortunate consequence of living under the tyranny of men like Gado. With that, Naruto too shot to his feet before angrily signing to her. Tsunade nodded, saying, "Fine. But don't overdo it." Naruto then walked out the door while everyone else looked on in confusion. Why can't he just write notes like a normal person? The third member of Team 7 murmured, prompting snickering from his teammates. Tsunade examined the boy as she recalled who he was. If she remembered correctly, the boy's name was Kanagi Sanjuro. He was the picture of mediocrity, being only slightly shorter than average, with short brown hair and dark eyes. What made him noteworthy was the fact that, like his teammate Sakura, Kanagi had a parent on the civilian council. The council was one of the chief reasons why Tsunade was worried about how this mission went. The Hokage had informed her that the council was unhappy with her foregoing a leadership position at the hospital, which she knew would have put her directly under their thumb, as it was technically under their jurisdiction, in favor of returning to active duty. As if to rub salt in the wound, she was not even taking high-profile missions that would bring money and recognition to the village, instead choosing to take on an apprentice as they worked as a backup team. She knew that their anger towards their inability to keep her on their leash was further compounded by her choice in apprentice, but the Hokage had made it clear that as she was technically an elite Jonin, she was authorized to request taking in any shinobi of her choosing as her apprentice, and that if they had a problem with her choice they could take it up with her personally. Luckily, thanks to some help from Shizune, she was constantly unable to answer their summons, as she conveniently would be volunteering for a shift at the hospital at the same time as whenever the meeting was in. According Naruto, who had studied every book he could find on Konoha's laws, her oath as a medic superseded almost everything short of a direct order from the Hokage. But if this mission went poorly, and either one of the children of members of the council or the last loyal wielder of the Sharingan wound up hurt, it wouldn't take much for the council to pin the blame on her as the highest-ranking shinobi present, which would ultimately result in Naruto's life being made more difficult in some way. Returning from her thoughts, she watched as Kiba waved his hands around in the air in an impression of Naruto, much to the amusement of Sakura and Kanagi. Meanwhile, Sasuke sat unmoving, glaring at the door, while Hinata, Shino, Kurenai, and Kakashi did not look happy. "That's enough, Kiba," Kurenai snapped. "I won't tolerate you making fun of your fellow shinobi. Especially not for something over which he has no control." Kiba had the decency to look at least somewhat ashamed as he lowered his arms. "Could you tell us what he said, Tsunade-sama?" "He told me to tell Tazuna that he'll definitely help protect him while the bridge is built, and promised that he would do everything he could to help you get out from Gado's control. He then told me he was going to train." "Tsunade-sama, if I may," Tsunami asked hesitantly. "What happened to cause Naruto-san's mutism?" "I'm curious as well," Kurenai added. "I used to see him on occasion when he was younger, and he definitely wasn't mute back then." Tsunade looked around at the eager faces of those around her. Even Kakashi had lifted his eyes from his book to listen intently. She knew she couldn't reveal too much, as most of what had happened that night 5 years ago. She suspected Kakashi had an idea of at least when Naruto suffered his affliction, as he had been one of the Anbu unconscious in her sensei's office that night. "Technically, Naruto isn't mute," she explained. He has the ability to speak, though it causes him pain to speak in anything louder than a hoarse whisper or for extended periods of time. What happened to him? Hinata asked. He was injured quite severely when he was younger. As a result, his vocal cords were permanently damaged. Gasps echoed around the room while both Kurenai and Hinata felt the sting of tears in their eyes. They both were aware of Naruto's less than hospitable treatment by the people of Konoha, and had immediately guessed the cause of injury. How could anyone do something so cruel to Naruto-kun? Hinata thought to herself sadly. Kurenai, on the other hand, was struggling to control herself. Experience and a good friend in the torture and interrogation department provided her with a better understanding of the motive behind Naruto's injuries. They wanted to keep him from screaming or calling for help, Kurenai thought in disgust, and they think he's a demon. They're no better than animals. So, what's with the weird hand movements? Tazuna asked. It's how he communicates, Tsunade replied. After losing his voice, Naruto found out very quickly how inconvenient it was to write down everything he wanted to say. Especially considering his tendency to ramble when he gets excited. Tsunade smiled fondly, noting with amusement similar expressions on both Kurenai and Hinata's faces, before continuing. He knew that shinobi at times had to communicate without speaking, so he read every book he could find that even had a passing mention of the different hand signs used to communicate during covert missions, and using that as his base, started to develop his own language. I had noticed a few similarities to the covert commands, Kakashi noted, secretly very impressed that a boy who was not exactly known for his cerebral aptitudes, could study a handful of hand gestures and create an entire language. That's quite impressive, Shino added. He did not expect the dead last of his class to figure out such a smart workaround to his disability. But, then again, a week ago he would not have expected Naruto to not only hold his own, but do quite well in a fight that included 3 genin and their sensei. It seems Naruto is full of surprises. Sasuke scoffed. It doesn't matter, it's still useless. Does he really expect everyone around him to learn some made-up language because it would be more convenient for him? Tsunade scowled angrily at the boy. She was one more snide comment from sending him flying back to Konoha with a flick of her wrist. Council be damned when Hinata piped up. Anyo, do you think I could learn this language, Tsunade-sama? I would not be opposed to developing an understanding of Naruto-san's method of communication either, Shino added. It may be beneficial for future missions with him. I'd like to learn it as well, Kurenai said. She leveled Kakashi with a look and he sighed. I guess it couldn't hurt to memorize it with my Sharingan, he reasoned. Tsunade scoffed. Good luck with that. Naruto's not the biggest fan of the Sharingan. She watched as Sasuke stiffened while his glaring at the door added yet another level of malice. He's probably just jealous, Kanagi said, failing to keep the envy out of his own eyes as he glanced at Sasuke. That's right, Sakura added loudly. Naruto Baka is just jealous that Sasuke-kun has the most powerful bloodline while he's just a clanless loser who probably fell out of a tree and lost his own voice. Tsunade stood angrily, struggling to keep any of her killing intent from leaking out and affecting her clients. She turned without a word and followed her student outside, slamming the door hard enough for a large crack to appear in the door. She stomped her way through the forest outside the house, taking several deep breaths in an attempt to calm herself while she looked for Naruto. She found him sitting cross-legged in a small clearing while several clones surrounded him swinging their swords as they practiced various drills. Some of them were even standing horizontally on the trees as they practiced. Taking a seat next to him, she poked him in the shoulder. You know you don't get any physical benefits training with shadow clones, right? Naruto opened his eyes and turned his head to look at her with a smile. I know, he replied quietly. She saw he had his Kunshugen activated, found that in the dark of night, the orange swirls glowed ever so slightly. I'm using them to get used to the sword while I practice with the Kunshugen. Any progress? Naruto frowned contemplatively. It already felt, I dunno, right, when I held the sword before. By the time they're done, I'll have mastered the beginner drills and will be ready to find a kenjutsu style that fits well for me. Tsunade smiled and wrapped her arm around his shoulders. That's good to hear. I'm sure you'll be a kenjutsu master in no time. Especially if your skill with a blade takes after your mother like your skill with seals has, she added silently. But I was actually asking about your Kunshugen. Have you figured out anything else about it? The scroll in Sarutobi Sensei's office will only show more to the wielder of it. Well, my eyesight's way better, Naruto surmised. Also I can see my chakra, and it makes my eyes sting a bit, but if I really focus I can sort of see yours too, though it got easier once you touched me. That's useful, Tsunade noted. You might not like the Sharingan, but you can't deny it would make learning certain techniques easier if you could see how to mold the chakra properly, even if you can't copy it. Until then, it'll help to at least see your own chakra. That way you're less susceptible to genjutsu and you can watch it as you practice your chakra control. What about your ability to stop time? Naruto sighed and rested his head on her shoulder with a pout. Staying still is hard. Tsunade giggled and pulled him closer. You sound like my old teammate. Naruto raised an eyebrow curiously. He once told me about this special training he had once done, and the first step involved him learning to sit perfectly still. If he didn't, he would fall off the spike he was balancing on. Like you, he's a pretty hyperactive guy, so it took him a long time to master it. They sat in silence for several minutes until one of the clones practicing nearby dispelled. You never did tell me what drove you to pull that stupid stunt with Ryosuke, by the way. It's a gift from the gods, Naruto replied cryptically. What are you talking about? The sword. He said it was a gift from the gods. He took the glove off his right hand, revealing the dark, metallic musculature of his hand, and rapped his knuckles against the blade with a sharp clang. They're the same metal. So you think Ryosuke was serious when he said the gods gave him it? Naruto shook his head, slipping his glove back on as he started signing to give his voice a break. I think that someone was given it, and that Ryosuke stumbled across it much later. What makes you say that? Every time he attacked us, my arm hurt. It felt like it was trying to tell me something. At the same time I started feeling like Ryosuke was hurting someone close to me every time he swung it. There's also this. He pointed at the guard and Tsunade examined it closely. It was made of what looked to be gold, which meshed well with the obsidian blade and the crimson wrap around the hilt. It was in the shape of a 3-inch diameter circle engraved with a swirl in its center. There were 7 points protruding from the guard, with the hilt acting as the 8th. They were evenly spaced with the 2 running perpendicular to the hilt and the one from which the blade emerged being slightly longer than the ones in the corners. Tsunade's eyes widened as she realized the guard was in the shape of the sun. Amaterasu, she whispered. Naruto nodded. Considering the fact that its previous owner didn't seem like the kind of guy who she would find worthy, we can only guess that he took it from its last owner. It's covered in all sorts of seals that I can barely even start to understand, but as far as I could tell, it continuously takes and stores your chakra, which is what helps fuel those attacks he was using. Well, if it's a gift from Amaterasu-sama, it should probably stay with the one who actually received her blessing, Tsunade reasoned. They continued to chat for a while. The clones practiced before unsealing their bedrolls and going to bed right there, rather than go inside and deal with the others in there. Ooh. The next morning they woke up and Naruto went on a short hunting trip, catching a small deer for Tsunami to cook. After a hearty breakfast in which Tazuna expressed his concerns for the increasing number of workers who were quitting due to fear of Gato's retribution. Scowling, Naruto created a clone with even more chakra than usual and sent it with Tazuna and Hinata while Tsunade and another clone went back to the clinic to help out again. The original Naruto joined the members of Teams 7 and 8 as well as their sensei for some training for what they had been informed would be an inevitable rematch with Zabuza Momochi and at least one other who was dressed as a hunter nin. Seeing as Naruto's just joined us, why don't you all show him what you have been practicing these last couple days? Kakashi suggested. Naruto watched as the others all started running up the side of trees. He noted that while Sakura and Kanagi seemed to be having the easiest times, they were tiring rather quickly, while Shino, Sasuke, and Kiba were having more trouble climbing the trees but seemed to have more energy. He was about to turn to go do his own training when he bumped into Kurenai. Kurenai smiled down at him as he looked at her with a mischievous grin. Going somewhere? She asked. Naruto created two clones who quickly to the trees for a horizontal sparring match before turning back to her. I guess I should have anticipated that with someone like Tsunade-sama as your sensei, you would have been drilled pretty hard on chakra control already. Naruto smiled sheepishly and nodded. Well, if that's the case, would you like to teach me something? Naruto raised an eyebrow curiously at her offer and indicated for her to go on. Well, we were speaking to Tsunade-sama yesterday and a few of us decided that we would like to learn that language you use with your hands. If she hadn't wanted to before, the beaming grin on Naruto's face would have been more than enough to make Kurenai resolve to master this form of communication. He indicated they head back to the house and she followed him. Once inside they waved to Tsunami before taking a seat next to each other at the table. Naruto unsealed his pen and paper. It started simply enough with him writing down a letter then showing her the corresponding hand sign. He wrote down that usually he only used the letters for spelling out most names or certain words he hadn't thought of a gesture for yet. What do you mean by most names? Kurenai asked. Naruto responded by bringing his hands up to touch his fingers to his shoulders before pointing at her. Kurenai mimicked the action with an inquisitive look on her face. Me? She asked. When he nodded, she was only more confused. How did you decide this would be the sign for my name? Naruto shook his head with a soft smile on his face and for the first time in over half a decade, Kurenai heard him speak. Not Kurenai, he said. The deep breathy quality of his voice was so different from what she remembered that she couldn't help but shiver at the sound of it. He put his hands over her own and brought them up to her shoulders, their faces much closer now she could properly hear him over the sound of Tsunami cooking food in the other room. Tenshi. Kurenai's face flushed with heat at their proximity, but she couldn't contain the grin that split her face. It's nice to hear your voice again, Naruto. She murmured. It's nice to talk to you again, Naruto replied quietly. Without thinking, Kurenai's hands drifted towards the burnt orange scarf he constantly wore around his neck. She paused as he stiffened and looked up into his deep blue eyes. May I? She asked quietly, fully prepared to pull back for fear of having crossed some line. Naruto looked torn as he searched her eyes. They shone with passion and concern, and to his relief there was not a trace of pity. He kept his gaze forward as she pulled away his scarf, closing his eyes as her gasp indicated that ugly, jagged scar that stretched across the front of his neck just below his Adam's apple was revealed. They opened as instead of cries of disgust at one of his many deformities, he was roughly pulled into Kurenai's embrace as hot tears spilled onto his exposed neck. "I'm so sorry," Kurenai whispered brokenly. "I should have done more. I should have kept trying to find you when I stopped seeing you around town." She whimpered as strong arms encircled her as well. "Don't cry, Tenshi-chan," Naruto whispered soothingly. "I didn't want you or Aoheim getting in trouble by being seen with me. But now I'm a shinobi. The council has no say on who I spend my time with. I can train with you and Aoheim and Shino as much as I want now." Kurenai simply tightened her grip, simply enjoying